parts of my identity that I'm not proud of, that I only met during the pandemic. And so what happens is we would tend to project these insecurities and project that in our marketing and project that in the way that we speak to people. And again, since we're not taught an alternative way of speaking from a place of empowerment, of really getting creative and thinking about what is a more human way of connecting with people without harping on their vulnerabilities, pain, and suffering, it's not what's taught.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
Where are you from? Really? No, originally, where are you from? Can I touch your hair? Your English sounds so good. Nah, I don't see color. Those statements I've shared are just some of the daily microaggressions that people of color face on a regular basis when they occupy white spaces. Microaggressions are subtle yet negative racial messages that leave the person on the receiving end feeling hurt, humiliated, and even disrespected. You may have used these kinds of statements to start a conversation or even break ice with a person of color, but didn't realize the harm you were causing. That's why I've created a free microaggressions guide with 5 of the commonly made microaggressions in online coaching spaces that you need to know about and what you can do or say instead. Head over to anikishuru.com/micro to download your free guide. That's Anikishuru, GICHURU.com/micro, MICRO. I've just finished recording this episode with Marion Tan, and you are absolutely going to love it. Marion is full of so much impactful information when it comes to looking at empathetic messaging versus what we have been taught is ethical marketing. We get to talk about doing business, specifically how you position your brand, your marketing, your promotions, and doing them from a more heart-centered way where you're connecting with your clients at a deeper level and not surface, and really talking about the manipulative tactics that are out there that many people have fallen prey to ourselves. We spoke about the ways in which we have fallen prey to some of those tactics, and she shares about the future of marketing through that empathetic lens and what her hopes are for the future. But more than anything, we just talk about the importance of coming back home to yourself and doing business and positioning yourself through that empathetic lens. Now, Marion Tan is a personal brand strategist supporting change makers in articulating their multifaceted gifts through empathetic messaging. Through her brand consultancy, Hearten and Hone, she's on a mission to amplify the voice of human-centered thought leaders who want to forward their movement and invite the most aligned clients into their space, the kind and compassionate way, without resorting to manipulative marketing tactics. With clients featured in Vogue, Popsugar Fitness, and Bustle, she's helped dozens of coaches, consultants, and practitioners around the world in honing their ideas, expressing their unique approach, and evaluating their brands to position where they can lead influence and change culture for the better. Tune in. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Represented Podcast with me, Annie Gishuru, and Marion Tan. I'm so excited to have you. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to just dive into this because I have quite a few questions I'd like us to go through. And this is a conversation that I know my listeners have been waiting to hear. And so I want to start by asking, what does empathetic brand and strategy design mean?
I love that. Thank you so much for inviting me, Annie, and for initiating this conversation. I know it's a much needed topic that is really worth bringing more light to. So my definition of empathetic brand strategy, design, marketing, an empathetic experience around your brand, at its core, it's really just taking into account the humanity of the individual and building the experience around that as a human being and not just as a consumer. Because a lot of us have been taught, and the way that we've been brought up in this online space is to always get people to buy, and in turn, we resort to these marketing tactics and strategies that don't necessarily align with what it means to be a human, or, tends to bypass their lived experience, their trauma, the actual complex history of the person. We're not taught to take those into account because, again, the goal of running a business, as they say, is supposed to make profit, right? To get people to buy. But the question is, how do we do that in a way that's still in integrity with us and in a way that really considers the actual recipient of the offer, the transformation, the product or service that you're selling in the first place? So that's my simplest definition of an empathetic brand experience. It's really just acknowledging that the individuals that you're speaking to are firstly human beings before they're consumers.
I love this so much because this is an area that hasn't been amplified, particularly in the online space where we're just sell, market, go. And people, even well-meaning business owners, kind of lose their values in the process because we're in this space where we're watching what other people are doing and we're like, oh, that's selling. I need to do more of that. And in the process, forget the values that brought you here to doing this work and adopting some of this bro type marketing tactics that leave you feeling less than who you are and maybe presenting a persona that doesn't quite align with who you are as a human. And we will dive deeper into that just very shortly. But I want to ask, how did you arrive here, Marion? Was there something that happened in your career or something that you observed, as I've just, explained there, in terms of people just selling in a way that doesn't quite honor the human experience? Was there something that led you to doing this work?
Whenever I'm asked this question, I have such a hard time trying to pinpoint a very specific moment where everything shifted for me like 360, but I think it would be good to go back to how I got into the online space in the very beginning. So my background is in corporate marketing and advertising. And to cut the long story short, I started my business because I got the firsthand experience of what it's like to be in a company that would front their mission and ground their company on purpose. But behind the scenes, you see all these transactional, manipulative tactics that they normalize. And the unfortunate thing is they're aware of that. They're very aware of that, but they're like, people are just overthinking. People are just overreacting. It's normal to get hate. And so that was my first realization that made me think, oh, this isn't the type of culture or company that I want to contribute to. These aren't the people I want to learn from. I'm not one to dictate, this is the right way of doing things or that's wrong. But me personally, whenever something is out of integrity, I'm out. That was a very high paying job. I felt like, and it was a very tough company to get into. I felt like I had my whole future ahead of me. But if that's what's at stake, if that is my values are being compromised, then that's not something that I want to continue being a part of. And so when I got into the online space, I thought, oh, here are my people. There are so many people in this space running their businesses with values, with purpose, with intention. They pour so much of themselves into their brands. And those are the types of people that I want to be working with. But the thing is, when I got into the online space, I was almost in this, I would say, desperate position because I left my job. I started my business in November of 2020. I left my job in December. So I had to make ends meet. I had to pay the bills. And I did freelance work. I knew how to work with the clients, but I've never actually, ran an online business. And so when I tried to educate myself on these marketing tactics, how to sell high ticket packages, whatever, the only way I knew how was how we've been normally taught, bro marketing, urgency, highlight people's pain and challenges. And I have this very vivid memory of, is there a way that we can sell something without putting timers? Because that never felt good to me. Like that never felt comfortable to me. It was my first time encountering a sales page with a timer. And I was like, oh, this is weird. Why are there timers here? Like, okay, I have to make this decision within a week. And yeah, I just that I remember that being my first thought. And I told my mentor at the time that, I just found it weird, but I didn't really contest it. And I didn't really actively seek out an alternative way because I thought that was the only way. And it worked. It worked for everyone. Everyone was doing it. So, I was in that landscape where it was so normalized and that seemed to be the culture. And I just went along with it, but I knew deep down that it never felt good. And the thing is, I just didn't know how to articulate, or I didn't know an alternative way. And how I was able to land on, I guess, a way or a method that feels good to me now, a more human-centered, more empathetic way, is simply being in community with people. And it is in those interactions and exposure to other people's stories that I got to broaden my perspective around, what is accepted, or I expanded my sensitivity to emotional cues that eventually expanded my capacity for empathy as well. I met people with different backgrounds. I encountered individuals who have gone through experiences that I have never gone through, or I wasn't even aware of, but I realized, oh, this is actually a thing. This is actually a reality, and so that's when I became really aware of the responsibility that I had in holding spaces for these people, in communicating to them in a more compassionate, inclusive way, and also having this internal mission of being an example of that, because I work with a lot of people in the health and wellness space, people who are really making a difference in the lives of the people that they're also helping. So I thought, if I'm able to lead by example, hopefully they're inspired by that. And with that, they can also inspire the people who come into their space. And eventually, the future that I want to see is really seeing a culture of compassion and kindness in the way that we market our businesses, in the way that we build our brands, and eradicate bro marketing, completely. That was pretty long-winded, but that's the story.
I love the way you've taken us down that path and really painted that picture for us to understand, because a lot of people listening will resonate with that story when you arrive into the online space and you're like, is this what people are doing? Okay, timers. I've used timers. I use timers. And I'm so interested to know what the other alternatives are. But one of the things that I questioned from the very beginning when I started promoting my course was that you had to send X amount of emails every single day, like an email a day for the next 10 days or 14 days. And it just felt so uncomfortable doing that because it's sell for like 10 days straight or 14 days straight, however long your open cart
Mhm.
is for. And then, it's life is back to normal. And then again, you show up. And it was that just showing up to sell in that. What am I telling them for 10 emails was the question. And to me, it just felt like as somebody who's been sold for like that, sold to like that, I don't think it would feel good. And so it's something that I finally came around to and found the language to do it in a way that didn't make people feel like, come on, get into this course, you got to do this. And if you don't, this is what's going to end up. I found a rhythm of doing it that didn't make me feel uncomfortable, but still I questioned the need to do it that way. And so things have kind of changed up a little bit for us in that we don't send them every day during open cart. Open cart is a little bit longer, allowing people to kind of sink into it, know about it, and they don't have like, 3 or 4 days to make a decision and get this now and this and the other. But there are still aspects about it that still don't fully feel human-centered. And in particular, Marion, as we get into this time in the world globally, there's just so much that is happening. And a lot of people are beginning to talk about their emotional well-being. There's so much overwhelm, particularly in the US right now with the political race that's happening. And it always gets us from a global perspective. Like we all just hold our breath and just watch what's happening in the US because inevitably what happens there ends up influencing other countries in different ways. We end up, it has an impact on all of us in some way or other. And so all of this to say, I think it's so important that we are centering humans in the work that we're doing, that we're not getting lost with what the loudest voice is saying or doing, and really coming back home to who we are, particularly those who are empaths, particularly those who are people who lead with what perhaps might be called the softer skills, the gentler way of doing life, and not the feminine side of doing things rather than the masculine way of doing things. And there's no particularly better way to do it, but I think there are other aspects that have been more amplified than they ought to, and others have been really not been featured as much as they ought to be, because there is merit in doing that. And there are those who fall in that camp who would benefit, Marion.
Oh, I love this. I feel like you just opened Pandora's box. And I think I want to begin with, at the end of the day, we're businesses. And of course, we have to make sales. Like something has to come back to the business. And what you mentioned, like you use timers, I use timers too. But I think, there are some people who have this like fake evergreen or like fake limited time offers where you opt into something, like they give you a bonus, but you don't know that it's forever open. Like I didn't realize that because I opened a different browser and I got the same timer and I was like, I thought like I was like in the launch mode.
Yeah.
But now people are aware. So I think with things like that, just offering clarity around your offers, because it's also empathetic and it's also kind to tell people, hey, there's actually a deadline, like we actually close cart, because there may be people who want to get in a specific time, and you would want them to know that, you would want them to communicate that. And I think what really drives home the point is you'd want to pair this with your language, as you mentioned, too. It's the way that you communicate your offers, the way that you invite people to buy, or the way that you sell to people. So what we're used to is again, positioning yourself as an authority, which I think is so rooted in colonialism, right? And
Yes.
positioning yourself as the savior, highlighting their pain and problem without realizing that if you're on the receiving end of that, it's not a very good feeling to always be constantly told that you're wrong. This is
Yes.
5 mistakes that
Mhm.
you're making. Literally, I was telling someone yesterday as well. I was on another podcast. First thing Monday morning, when I opened my email, I got 2 consecutive emails from 2 different people. The first headline was around blank, the 5 mistakes you're making with your blank, blank, blank. And then the other one was, here's why your investments aren't working. So when I read those, again, it wasn't the kind of message that I wanted to receive on a Monday morning. And not just on a Monday morning, but any time of the day, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we already have so much on our plate. You mentioned our friends in the US, they're going through political unrest. There's this recession happening there. And the last thing that you would want to hear is to be told all of the things that you're missing out on, all of the things that you're not doing wrong, when, like it sort of inhibits someone creativity too, to only be resorting to these types of hooks, to these types of ways of grabbing people, because again, unfortunately, they work, but at what cost if it makes the other person, I mean, sure, let's say they buy it from you, but it made them feel less in that process, then it begs the question, is it really worth it to subscribe to quote unquote the tactics that work?
And there's fatigue, Marion, around
Mm,
this kind of messaging. Initially, when this messaging came out, whenever it did, or whenever I came across it, the
mhm.
mistakes you're making, or this is why this is not working, it was very like, I'm paying attention. Tell me what I'm doing wrong, or tell me what I need to do
Yeah.
to improve this. But because it's been happening for so long, and that has been the strategic hook, there's fatigue around it. And so now when I come across that, I'm like, it doesn't get me anymore. That's not the hook for me. In fact, there are people who come through the emails that come through from people I've subscribed to, and some of them are copywriters, and I just read some subject lines, and I feel like that's so desperate. And I know maybe sometimes I've used some of those because I've been told, this is a really good one to get people to open, your open rates, your click rates, that sort of thing. But there are times I will read certain titles and I will be like, that just feels so clickbaity. It
Mhm.
feels so desperate of, oh my God. And then you open the email and it's not what you expected it to be, you know. Like there was one where my husband did the unthinkable. And then you open it and then you're like, oh, come on,
Yeah.
what he spilled tea, or I don't know, just something where
Yeah.
you're like, oh, this wasn't what I expected at all. But it's just
Yeah.
trying to do whatever tactics they can to get your attention. And I don't feel like that for me works anymore. There's fatigue. We're just tired. We've seen that over and over and over. And also, being in the online space, particularly those who are educators, I'm an educator myself, the fatigue around constantly correcting people, constantly telling them what to do. I think people have reached that point where they're so saturated or they're so busy juggling so many things that that constant hum of this is what you need to do. This is, I think it's lost its significance. And I think we need to find a better way to connect with people because obviously, particularly with the work that I do with racial equity, this is work that people still want to do. They're interested in
Mm.
it. But I think that packaging sometimes can come off as you're doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. White women, listen, this is what you're getting wrong. And I can also think on the reverse for the educators themselves, the frustration, the the fatigue again in just saying the same thing over and over and over and losing the joy, the spark, the desire to continue doing this work.
Oh, you hit so many points. And I absolutely agree with the fatigue around receiving these types of messaging and giving that kind of messaging as well. And I think it really stems from this. A lot of us have so many things to heal, especially during the pandemic where we were made to confront our deepest demons, our trauma. I personally have experienced meeting these, I guess like my past self, things that parts of my identity that I'm not proud of that I only met during the pandemic. And so what happens is we would tend to project these insecurities and project that in our marketing and project that in the way that we speak to people. And again, since we're not taught an alternative way of speaking from a place of empowerment, of really getting creative and thinking about what is a more human way of connecting with people without harping on their vulnerabilities, pain, and suffering, it's not what's taught in the industry. So a lot of us think that, again, like there's no alternative way, and so we resort to these clickbaity hooks. But there was someone who said this, and I heard this recently. I don't remember who, so if anyone remembers who said this person said that it's not the hooks that gets those open rates, it's you as the thought leader, as the individual. So if you're able to lead by example, if you're able to show up as the leader that you are, who's in full integrity and doing things that is in alignment with your values and what you really stand for, without comparing that to what another person is doing, or without putting your audience down to get people to listen to you, then I think you've hit the gold mine, because you don't have to resort to these manipulative, attention grabbing tactics and hooks that don't necessarily feel good. You mentioned something earlier about coming home, just remembered, coming home to who you are, which I absolutely love so much, because every time I speak about empathetic marketing or marketing from a place of compassion, I would always get the response that I am so glad that you articulated the way that I've wanted to do marketing for so long. I just didn't know that that was a possibility. I just didn't know that that's how you do it. And to see this tangibly and an example of that makes me feel more motivated. And I think that's the biggest compliment and the biggest manifestation of my personal mission being carried out, because it's really showing people that there's a better way. Again, I'm not one to dictate right or wrong way, but if the traditional way of doing marketing and communicating, dehumanizing messaging doesn't feel good to you, then here's an alternative. Maybe this would fit your personality better. Maybe this would make you love marketing and selling and telling your stories and inviting people into your space and how you help. And I think that's the irony too of the online space, right? Like people tell you, people buy from people, but then the kind of person that the online space is molding you to be is not a very pleasant or likable person. In real life, we're not like this. We don't go in front of people and tell them, hey, here's what you're doing wrong, blah, 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 blah. Here are the mistakes that you're making. We're actually, as human beings, we're very gentle. It's natural for us to be compassionate, to be sensitive, to take into consideration what another person is going through, even if we don't know the full picture. So I just wanted to highlight that, because I really like what you said about, coming home to who you are, because fundamentally, as human beings, we live in community, we exist with other people. So why do we communicate the complete opposite way when we're in the online space, when we're marketing our businesses?
Wow, you've articulated that so beautifully about how we do life as humans. We're not there putting each other down. We're in community. We're being gentle with one another. We're seeking ways to be of service. to one another. And as a practical example, our neighbors, I believe they're Middle Eastern, and they just have this community. It is so different, so different. And we live in quite a little bit of a multicultural street, in that for that particular family, they just have relatives upon relatives that descend on that house on a very regular basis, many hours of the day. And you can just see they're doing life as a community. Kids are being dropped off, kids are being picked up, they're playing in the backyard, front yard. The parents are communicating, there's loud voices, there's women are being dropped off, men are going together. Like there's just so much, it's such a buzz of activity. And what comes to mind right now as we're talking about this is that they're in service to one another. They're doing life together, and they're just in service to one another. Whatever they need, they're there. And those communities do life so differently. They're very family oriented. They're very there. They do things in a big way. And I think it's a little bit different from Western culture, which is very me oriented. It's very individualized. It's very our family, our nuclear family, so to speak, and us and what we're doing for us. And it's not so much the wider community or the extended family. And we only see that maybe during special occasions, like, if there's a celebration, say Christmas, for those who celebrate Christmas and so on. But yeah, that for me is such a practical example of what doing life is and how we commune with one another. I'd love to ask a question. Typically, who are the clients who get in touch with you, and what are they struggling with, and how do you support them?
I work with a lot of people in the health and wellness space, people who also social impact space, people who are really using their businesses as vessels to make a difference, make a change. And the financial benefit of that is just the cherry on top. It's just a byproduct of doing good work. And they come to me again because they resonate with the intentionality and purpose and mission that goes behind my work. I personally used to think that, because I do messaging, branding, strategy, design, they're very intangible results. And my biggest thing was, how do I attract aligned people and make them see the value of my work? I thought I had to lead with X percentages of like my clients' audience base increasing, or how much revenue they acquired from working with me, or the numerical measures of success, when in reality no one has ever asked me, how much have you contributed to this brand's revenue, or how can you get me to X income per month. What they would always come to me for is, I know I have something transformational and unique and life-changing. I'm not sure how to communicate that.
Mm-hmm.
And these people would always point out, I have a question in my intake form that says, what made you want to work with me, or what made you want to work with a studio? And they would always point out, I love your human-centered way of doing things. I love your empathetic way of doing things. Not all of them are able to articulate that, and they're not subject matter experts on what that is, but they just know, and they see from my content and the way that I show up too, that they gravitate towards that kind of messaging and that kind of marketing. So that's what I also help them with. It's really supporting them in articulating and bringing forward their unique strengths and values, the transformation that they provide, without resorting to manipulative, dehumanizing tactics and clickbaits. Because at the end of the day, you would want people to purchase from you or choose you as the person to hire because of your independent strengths, not in comparison to you're better than this one, you're better than me, you're better than your audience, but you individually, independently, as an autonomous entity, what is something in you that would make me want to work with you, that would make me want to invite myself into your space, wholeheartedly and independently without you having to manipulate me and without even the benefits of, the typical tangible results that we're taught to sell, like finances or again, like measurable benefits. So that's what really I support individuals with. It's allowing them to tap into their creativity and really go within, like really go deep into themselves and look at themselves. What is the thing that makes me different? What is the thing that I can help with that I know in my heart is what I'm meant to do before what the online space told me what I should be communicating? So it's a lot of deep work. It's a lot of exploratory work. It's challenging too. It's creatively challenging, but it's very rewarding. It's very fulfilling to land on that and to be in alignment with that, because then it's just very easy to show up with your message and your brand if you're attuned to that inner spark that you've always had.
And I believe you mentioned this, the byproduct of it is that your revenue does increase. You get to connect with other heart-centered humans that you want to serve more of. And you had clients featured in Vogue, Popsugar Fitness, and Bustle. What is it about those brands that have landed them on such prominent platforms? Because mostly people would think, oh, they it's all about perhaps how they've positioned themselves as, what we know traditionally marketing to be and look like. But what do you think has allowed them to be featured on such a prominent platforms?
The biggest thing I believe is just that confidence of knowing that this is what I'm meant to do. This is how I communicate, how I help. And from doing good work, from doing transformational work, it doesn't even have to be world changing. It could just be pioneering meditation in the workspace or having this unique method of life coaching, that the media pick up, and eventually you constantly communicate this message, you keep on talking about this, people catch on to it, and they invite you, they want to give you this bigger platform where you could share your story. This happened to one of my clients who was actually picked up by national television. I didn't even know. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you were featured. And she really just mentioned that it came from having clarity on what she does and her unique way of doing things. So it's that ripple effect. It's that ripple effect of having something good and amplifying that goodness through your voice, through your message, that you get these opportunities.
So much goodness there that you shared in terms of the rewards that they're able to receive and that you're seeing for your clients. And we've been talking a little bit about well-meaning businesses, business owners getting stuck into bro type marketing, ending up compromising their values for the sake of the sale. What do you think is driving this, whereby people are not being able to make decisions for themselves? What do you think is driving this? Because I don't know, there's certain, like when you were working at that organization, you're like, this is not in alignment. I am not going to continue working here because it just doesn't align. And you were able to make that decision for yourself. But there are many people who are seeing things that don't feel good, but because is what has been deemed the norm. Why do you think that they're getting sucked into it?
I mentioned that we live in community, right? Like our natural way of being is to be in community, and the natural way that we interact with people is in a very gentle and compassionate manner. On the flip side of that, it's the same side of the coin, but on the other side, it's this same sense of desire for belonging that makes us subscribe to things that don't necessarily feel aligned with us, because and I experienced this when I first started running my business, because everyone is doing it. If we go against the status quo, it makes us feel left out. It makes us feel alone. And it's also this sense of independence that is scary, because we don't see a lot of people doing it. So if everyone is going this way and we go the other way, what is beyond that? It's unknown, so it's scary. So I might as well go with the methods that I see is working for a lot of people. It may not necessarily be what I'm inclined to, but it's working. I need money. And that's where the depletion of, the like how you live in integrity and how you act in integrity and within your values, that's where that starts to lessen, and that it gets covered up by, again, the shiny things, the revenue, the vanity metrics, the virality. And it's sad, because once you've gotten a taste of that success, you just like put all your values and principles out the door, right? Which will eventually catch on to you, as what it did for me, because I did do some of these tactics. They never felt good. I did see results from it, so I thought it's what it is, and I continued doing it. But eventually it just never felt good, and more resistance came from that. So it really stems from this desire to belong. But I think there's so much inner work and healing and self-acceptance to be done around that. Because if you're very grounded, if you feel very secure in what you're able to offer and in the way that you do things, you will naturally and inevitably attract people who have the same values as you too. Because human beings, we have so many similarities, and essentially we're made up of the same thing. So if you're feeling this way, it's very unlikely that you're the only one feeling that way. So what you have to do is to lead by example, to show up and really stand by that. And then naturally you will call in people who share in that same method, or in the way that you do things.
Like attracts like. I know that for a fact.
Totally.
We've been speaking a little bit about manipulative tactics. What have you seen around marketing? We've mentioned the timers. What are other things that you've mentioned, just so that somebody who's listening is aware of it, and not just aware of it so that they can avoid using it, but be informed about it? Like when we talk about timers, why are they so bad to use? Because sometimes they are false timers that make you, as you said, you clicked on that particular one, you're like, I'm going to buy this. And then you found it under another sort of browser, and you're like, oh, I thought it was only for like 24 hours, and now here it is. And maybe that time is not there, or it's extended. What are some of those manipulative tactics that you've come across?
Well, that's definitely one. False urgency. The other one would be the obvious one, pain point marketing, where you're harping on someone's guilt, or you're guilt tripping someone, shaming them, fearing them into buying from you, making them think, oh, if you don't purchase this, then you're going to be stuck where you are forever. You're not going to see any kind of change in your life. Another thing that I see a lot is it's very subtle, to putting down another person's offer to lift yours up, and really just being adamant about, this method is wrong, mine is so much better. And it's manipulative, because you're bypassing someone's autonomy and independence and decision making. Like, a lot of us have been taught that our audience, they're stupid, and so we have to dictate what they should be doing. But no, they're very smart, they're sophisticated, they're empowered, they know what is right for them. And so it's just on you to serve your offer, and then let them decide what's good for them. Another thing that I think or have experienced, I don't think a lot of people do this in my circle now, but definitely before, was taking payment during the call and just pressuring people to, it's like the same as timers, right? Because you're pressuring people to make a decision.
Yes.
And I think it's very inconsiderate of someone, because they might need to consult with their partner, or they may not be ready to financially invest. Maybe they're just in a position where they're just doing their research or just lurking around, which is okay. It's a very normal way of purchasing. And so yeah, taking payment during the call. Another very subtle one is not necessarily marketing, but I guess so, because people teach it as well, but we see it in sales calls, is overcoming objections. Because if someone presents an objection, it's not on you to let them see that that's wrong. It's not on you to just tell them that's a mindset block or that's a limiting belief. If they have an objection, like for example, if they tell you, oh, I don't have the money right now, people would teach you or tell you, oh, make them see that, is it just, do they really not have the money, or is it just a limiting belief? Are they just afraid to invest in themselves without really knowing the full context? Maybe someone really doesn't physically have the money right now, So again, you'd want to create that culture where it's safe for them to invest, where they're able to demonstrate and practice their full autonomy when making a decision. So a lot of these manipulative tactics really just tend to bypass someone's independence and wouldn't give them consent in, like how they would want to receive these types of messages and these types of selling and marketing efforts.
Yeah, and as you were mentioning that bit about, somebody not having the money or feeling the pressure that they need to make a decision, and you're trying to speak to, their mindset and trying to help them shift that limiting belief. Another area that I have seen has been around paying in full and payment plans. And so if you pay in full, you are paying a reduced amount. But if you take a payment plan, then there's a percentage that has been added on there. Sometimes it is for admin reasons because of the number of times that you have to, take the money out or send those reminders. And obviously the cost does add up. But the person who's taking a payment plan is taking it because they do not have the ability to potentially pay in full. And so that person is being penalized. The one who cannot afford it is the one who's being penalized and is paying more than the one who has paid in full. And in so many ways, that is not equitable. That is not, really taking care of the needs of those people who need it more. So how could we make this more equitable? Could we remove that extra amount of money so that everybody's paying the same, regardless of what way they choose to, make that payment? And there's obviously the other side of the conversation or the argument whereby like, oh, what if they default or they don't make payment, and then you're stuck with this. You've probably given them a service or a product, they haven't paid for it, and so there is that to address, but I don't know if charging more is the answer to that when they're genuine people who want to take on your program or want to work with you, but they're being made to, to pay more. And a lot of people jump onto that bandwagon without thinking about that. And, and also other ways of how can I be more equitable in how I'm marketing? How can I be more equitable in how I'm selling? And the experience of the people coming through those doors and getting to work with you. Do they feel a certain way with you when you've sold to them or you've been in touch with them for them to come through? Are you very active? And then once they're, they're in, you're like, okay, it's a very different relationship with, I know a number of people have experienced.
Yeah.
There is so much to take into consideration. And also another tactic, and this came up, I think you might have been there for a particular call that you and I are in the same membership, where somebody shared that they bought something thinking that it was something they needed, but when they ended up going through the program, it was something so basic that they had answers to. So how it was marketed and made to feel like it was something that this person needed ended up being something so basic that they could have easily Googled and gotten their own support. So again, the integrity in how we're positioning the things that we're selling.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that this whole marketing ethically, as people would label it, is almost like a buzzword now, because thought leaders and educators, coaches are also aware that people are more choosy or more selective of the transactions that they're making. They're more discerning about who they're hiring and who they're seeking out. And because of that, people think, oh, if I just slap on, I do things ethically, or I always take you into consideration, then maybe this might increase my sales. There are so many people who are good at marketing, but unfortunately not very good at delivering and keeping with their word. I see a lot of masterminds too, where you want to be mentored directly by a specific coach or that person, and then you go into the mastermind and then they pass you off to someone else, and you didn't pay that much to
Absolutely.
get advice from someone you've probably never even met.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not communicated enough. There's not enough clarity around the actual thing that people are receiving inside containers, and that's where the harm and damage is being caused, when you're not very upfront about the actual inclusions of your offer or of your container.
And I've just remembered one of the things that I've heard you say before is the term ethical versus empathy. Like, there's a difference. Could you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. I think I lean towards, empathetic marketing and empathetic messaging. That's what I use, because personally I feel like ethics is subjective. Well, it's not personally I feel like, but ethics is subjective. That's a fact. And there are just a lot of cultural implications and personal implications to that define someone's ethical framework. And so I don't use that. And I also think that a lot of people shy away from being ethical if, like they're actually people who want to be in integrity with what they're doing, who really stand by their beliefs and want to be responsible about the way that they show up online. If you claim that something is ethical, what's the measure of that? Like, how could you really tell that what you're doing is ethical? Like, what's the basis for that? And so for that reason, I don't use that, because I feel like by definition, ethics is a standardized moral set of principles. And I don't personally, it's a personal thing. I just don't want to claim that I have moral principles that people should follow, because I'm not very well versed in that realm. And there's a lot of education and responsibility that is required for you to claim that what you're doing is ethical. And I personally just don't feel like I'm in that position. Whereas with empathy, it's more rooted in your connection with an individual. It's bearing witness to what someone has experienced because you feel that way as well, or if you've gone through that experience as well, or even if you haven't gone through that experience, you just are in communion with what they're going through and the situation that they're in. And at the end of the day, I mean, someone's ethical framework is also rooted in their empathy too. And I think, that's just the way that I communicate what I do and to communicate my method of doing things. It's more emotionally driven. It's more about being sensitive to the emotional cues and the human interactions that you have with people more than a standardized set of rules or principles that you have to follow.
Yeah, and this has reminded me of something that I often tell my students, best practice doesn't
Mm,
mean that it's best practice for everybody. You've got to think
so
about
true.
who are the best practices set by, who is setting the standards. And in particular, with my work with racial equity, it is always going back to white supremacy.
Mm,
Who did they have in mind when they created this? Who is it best practice for? Because there are people who have been excluded from this conversation. There are people who they did not have in mind. It's not best practice for them. When you look at workplaces that say this is the dress code and something
mm,
else perhaps that has attire that is, I'm from Africa. We have African designs and prints. And if you were to wear that in a corporate setting, it is deemed unprofessional. Or if I was to wear my hair, naturally in the Afro state that it is, would be viewed as perhaps unprofessional. And I might look like I am not as educated or as, that I might have, you know, something to offer at the same level as others who are around that executive table. And so you've got to put yourself or change yourself, shift yourself to be something that you are not to fit the best practice
mm,
norms. And it is harmful, it is dangerous when we do that because we are not taking people as individuals, but we're trying to make people fit into something that someone has created as
mm.
what is ethical, what is standard.
I love that. Yeah, I 100% agree that just because something is best practice doesn't necessarily mean that it applies to everyone. Because with marketing, with business, the best practice is to highlight people's challenges and pain, right? But it's not necessarily what is compassionate and inclusive and human-centered. So there's a lot of there are so many things to be learned for sure, and there's a lot of care that needs to go into marketing and running our business in the way that we operate, and it adds on that extra layer of really educating oneself and holding that responsibility. But and I think personally it's always worth it, because when you're dealing with human beings, at the end of the day, the most important thing is how that human being or how that person feels after interacting with you. I think my biggest metric of success is not necessarily if someone pays me, but if I made someone feel better, at the end of the day, even if it's just through my content, even if it's just the way that I showed up. And then again, going back, financial success or the revenue from doing a business in that way is just a byproduct of that.
Mm. And so, what are you seeing the current trends in marketing from heart-centered thought leaders that you're supporting? What are they doing well to connect with their audience, their community?
This is such an interesting question, because I think this year, more than ever, people have shifted, have transitioned, pivoted their businesses so much because they actually started to listen to their people, which is what we should have been
Wow.
doing in
Yep.
the first place. I see so many people, let's say, charging 20K for a mastermind and realizing that, oh, my audience actually isn't in a position to pay that much money. And so, how can I make this more accessible for people? How can I extend the container so that they don't have to feel pressured to finish it within a certain amount of time, in case something comes up in their lives, or in case they go through a personal challenge. How can I make this more inclusive and more fitting in the lives of actual human beings? Because a lot of us built our businesses during the pandemic, which is sort of like a dystopian setup. It's not real, it's not real life. People aren't meant to be stuck on their laptops. The people, I think during the pandemic too, we didn't spend on a lot of things because everyone is just at home. But real life is not like that. Real life is more dynamic. There's more nuance to it. So how can I make my containers more nuanced and really just be clear about what I'm offering and how I'm communicating that? So they're not huge shifts, but again, they're very subtle shifts, like simply extending a container, making one's pricing more accessible, being mindful of the way that they communicate their messaging and the way that they market their businesses. But again, because we've been taught otherwise, we're just unlearning things and doing things the way that we ought to do, or the way that feels in alignment with how we've always wanted to do things.
And as an empathetic brand strategist, what areas are you personally working on to better serve your clients? And what are you hoping to see more of in the industry? I know earlier on at the beginning of this conversation, you said you're hoping to see more compassion, but I'm so interested to know what areas you are personally working on, because we're all working on areas to just do better. And what are you hoping to see?
Oh, I love this question. I always like being put in a position where I'm made to think about, the possibility in the future. And I know that you know this about me too, that I'm always constantly trying to think of ways to demonstrate empathy in my marketing and in my business. As I mentioned, I'm not formally trained, so hopefully this is inspiration as well to anyone who wants to take on a more human-centered approach to marketing. Like, my background is marketing. I'm not formally trained in like what you do, the DEI work or being trauma informed. Those aren't my realm of expertise, but those are the things that I'm constantly educating myself on, putting myself in containers where I could learn more about those. And again, being in community with people, exposing myself to different backgrounds, different types of people, because that's how I learned initially. And that's how I'm continuing expanding my knowledge as well. And I was also sharing this to someone yesterday, where the future that I want is, or what I hope to see, is that the more human-centered, empathetic way is the norm when we run our businesses, because the norm right now is bro marketing. That is just a fact, which is a sad one, that is, but that's part of my personal mission for someone to come into the online space and see, oh, this is such an uplifting, heartwarming community that I'm getting myself into. It's energizing and rejuvenating for me to connect with these people, to support enterprises, to support other businesses, and not have all those icky, manipulative feelings paint the way that we do business.
Oh my goodness, that is powerful. I love it. Last question. If fear was not a factor, how do you think you'd show up more or differently in your work?
Wow, I never thought of that. I think, no, actually I have an answer. I think I would just be more adamant and relentless about an empathetic way of doing things. Because, to be very honest and transparently, I would hold back sometimes, because at the end of the day, I'm a human being. Like, I'm not perfect. I'm not saying that everything that I'm doing is right. I'm always compassionate. I still resort to some of these tactics, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes consciously, and only later realizing, oh, that wasn't my intention. Oh, this actually didn't come off the way that I wanted to. So if fear wasn't a thing, I would just be more active about standing behind that, like, an empathetic way of marketing. Because sometimes I fear that if this is what I stand for and I do something otherwise that is actually quote unquote unethical, or is actually not the best way of approaching things that I may not have realized before, then what does that make me, right? Like, I would tend to gaslight myself and question myself. Oh, can I really position myself, or can I really educate people on this if I myself am not a full expert on it? But I think, again, it goes back to what you say too. It's about progress. It's not about perfection. We're never going to reach perfection. We're never going to be an expert in holding spaces and in displaying empathy. Even the most well-certified, well-decorated therapist or social worker or trauma-informed care educator, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to cause harm, one or the other. But the important thing there is that acknowledgement of your responsibility and that constant commitment and really dedication to making it a part of your life and a part of the way that you operate your business. It's not just a nice to have. It's, like how you actually demonstrate and embody that actively and in full awareness with what you're doing. So yeah, that's probably what I would do. Just being more unapologetic about it.
Be more unapologetic and adamant about it.
Yeah.
Do you currently have something that business owners can dive into, the work that you're doing, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a free resource, which is Empathetic Headlines. So it's a good start to communicating your offers empathetically, because I lay out examples of harmful hooks and then a better way or a more empathetic way of communicating it, and an explanation why it's more compassionate, why it's more inclusive. So it's not a guarantee that these are the hooks that are, will go viral, but it's a different way of communicating your offer or grabbing someone's attention, but in a kinder, more inclusive way that doesn't really put them down. So I have that as a free resource. You could download that. And I'm always on Instagram. If you want to continue the conversation, if you want to learn more about empathetic branding, messaging, marketing, have content around that. And yeah, we could work on your messaging and branding, since I'm all about the experience and really creating safe spaces within your brand for your audience and your community as well.
And I will have those links in the show notes for you to click and have a look and connect with Marion. I have loved this conversation so much. It has gone longer than I expected. And there was a time I was like, oh, maybe I won't ask those questions and I'll just, skip to the final ones. But this was a necessary conversation to have. And people need to hear this. People need to understand how they can connect at a deeper level in a way that is more aligned with their values. And so, Marion, thank you for the work that you do. You are needed. And I hope you just have a stampede of people just tripping over themselves, trying to connect with you and lining up to work with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Annie. It's such an honor to be sharing this space with you.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.